You've probably heard a lot recently about South Dakota Governor and one-time Trump VP contender Kristi Noem based on her new book, No Going Back, though in interviews she doesn't seem to know what exactly is in it.
You said when you learned of it, you immediately took action. You recorded the whole book and the audiobook. You read this whole passage out loud. Why didn't you take it out then when you read the audiobook?
When it was brought to my attention, and I asked the publisher if they would remove the name, and they did.
Okay, but you didn't answer my question. When you posted pictures and video of yourself recording the audiobook. When you recorded your own audiobook, you didn't notice
I'm
this
not going to
passage?
discuss about my meetings with world leaders.
I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you about recording the audiobook.
Did you want to talk about something else today?
No, I just wanted to know. We're just trying to get a straight answer from it. This has been...
Oh, you did.
That's right. It appears as though Kristi Noem has not even listened to her own audiobook, even though she's the one who allegedly wrote it and definitely read it out loud. So if she doesn't know what's in it, who does? Well, sadly, me. Yes, I downloaded all nearly 7 hours of Kristi Noem's new book, and once I started, I knew that there was no going back. Welcome to Elected. I'm your host, Luke Radel, with a few tips for anyone looking to download Governor Kristi Noem's new audiobook, No Going Back. First, don't, maybe. Second, if you do, don't come in expecting it to be as exciting and combative as the press tour would suggest. There are two main headlines that have come out of this book, and we'll talk about them a little later on, but I don't want you to come in here expecting there's going to be some laundry list of all the different pets she's killed. In fact, those are mostly brief asides and tangents from a book that is largely paint by numbers, obviously ghostwritten political memoir material. Take a listen to this particularly hacky metaphor that she uses in chapter 2.
We didn't have much money, but we did own a 2001 Buick LeSabre that had belonged to Brian's grandpa. That poor car had smashed-in fenders. It had a crushed roof from a rollover accident on an icy winter day she was in. It was quite the contrast to all the blacked-out Suburbans zooming through D.C. As out of place as our ride was in D.C., that's how I felt about the norms of campaigns and the money that fueled them.
Oh, wow! That is relatable!
But there are some trite portions of this book that, examined within the framework of this current scandal that she's facing, do become a bit more interesting. Take this portion from the introduction.
Going back means more political deception. To really unite and to move forward, we need truth from our leaders.
But why did you remove it? Is it because it's untrue, that passage?
No, this is something that I think I'm not going to talk about.
Or how about this part from chapter 2 where she says she reviewed every element of her campaign, but apparently doesn't know which world leader she's talking about in her own book.
As with everything related to the political arena, a megadose of skepticism is key. With every campaign, I asked more and more questions, because accountability seemed like a rare commodity. I personally reviewed every single proposal, invoice, and approved every mileage report. I knew where every dollar went. Instead of approving vague proposals for ad buys, I required specific details. Invoices had to show exactly what was delivered.
But let's talk about those world leaders for a second, because her stock answer when asked why she included an anecdote in her book about meeting Kim Jong-Un, even though she didn't meet Kim Jong-Un, is not to admit the fact that that never happened, but just to say, I don't talk about any of my meetings with world leaders.
You say that I remember when I met North Korean dictator Kim Jong-Un. I'm sure he underestimated me, having no clue about my experience staring down little tyrants. Governor, that never happened, did
What
it?
I have said in the book is that when I became aware of the content, that we had it changed. And that's the way that it is. So I should not have put that anecdote in the book. That I'm not going to talk about my meetings.
But an anecdote indicates that it happened, right?
I'm not going to talk about my conversations with world leaders.
I'm
not going to discuss about my meetings with world leaders. I don't talk about personal meetings with world leaders. I don't talk about my conversations with world leaders. I'm not going to talk about my specific meetings with world leaders. I'm just not going to do that. And I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to talk about meetings that I've had with world leaders. I don't have conversations about my conversations with world leaders. I've been working on policy for 30 years, Jesse, and that's what most people don't remember about me is I'm old.
Which is a perfectly fair answer for the governor to give if she hadn't spent time in her book talking about her meetings with world leaders.
Governors, effective ones anyways, lead their state in trade negotiations. As a congresswoman and as governor, I've met with Chinese President Xi Jinping, the king and the princes of Saudi Arabia, the king of Jordan, South Korean President, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The first visit I had with Netanyahu in Jerusalem was amazing. I was a no-name freshman member of Congress, sitting at a table with many other leaders, and Prime Minister Netanyahu looked at me and asked, "What would you like to add today, Congresswoman Noem? How are things in South Dakota?" He knew my name, and he knew where I was from. He'd done his homework. Of course he had.
Well, listen, you just have to understand the obsession with which world leaders she did or didn't meet with, or which audiobook she did or didn't read out loud. That's just a problem with the liberal mainstream media.
Reflected. And listen, this is what is so discouraging about politics and the media today. You're talking about a book that hasn't been released yet, that's been corrected before it's been released, and you haven't said one thing about Joe Biden saying that he was in prison with Nelson Mandela, that he started the civil rights movement. That
if I had an interview with Joe Biden, who I've asked for multiple times, I will definitely ask him about his record, but I'm asking you about your book here, which we have.
I'm just asking for why am I being treated differently than every other person that you've interviewed? I've looked at your last several weeks of your interviews. You don't interrupt other people. You let them talk. Thank you for inviting me to have this conversation about this book.
A very strong point there by Governor Kristi Noem. Now, a response by Governor Kristi Noem.
So many of the problems we face as conservatives are self-inflicted. Let's stop shooting our mouths off and stop shooting ourselves in the foot. Sure, we can blame the media or liberals, but the truth is we need to be smarter, speak clearly, and tell the truth.
Seriously, somebody should hand Kristi Noem her own book. But I think the most important part of this book that everyone's been talking about is this.
You include a story about shooting your dog, despite your team telling you not to put that in the book. I have to say the decision didn't go down well. To include the story about the dog, it's not gone down well. Many people are questioning your political future.
Well, I don't think you have the facts straight.
Cricket was a wire hair pointer, about 14 months old, and she had come to us from a home that had struggled with her aggressive personality. I was sure that she'd learn a lot going out with our older dogs that day. I was wrong. Within an hour of walking the first field, Cricket had blown past the group, gotten too far ahead. She'd flushed up birds that were out of range. She was out of her mind with excitement. The hunt was ruined. When I got back into my truck, Cricket was sitting in the passenger seat, looking like she had just won the lottery, the picture of pure joy. I hated that dog. As I drove home, I realized that I had no choice. Cricket was untrainable, and after trying to bite me, dangerous to anybody that she came in contact with. A dog who bites is dangerous and unpredictable. Are you listening, Joe Biden? At that moment, I realized I had to put her down. As I pulled into the driveway, I decided I had to deal with this problem myself. This was my dog, and it was my responsibility. And I would not ask somebody else to clean up my mess. I stopped the truck in the middle of the yard. I got out my gun, grabbed Cricket's leash, and I led her out into the pasture and down into the gravel pit. It was not a pleasant job, but it had to be done. And after it was over, I realized another unpleasant job needed to be done. Walking back up to the yard, I spotted our billy goat. I decided now was a good time as any to dispose of this problem too. So I went down to the corral, caught the goat, and dragged him out to the gravel pit. I tied him to a post, and when I went to shoot him, he jumped at the last second. My shot was off, and I needed one more shell to finish the job. The problem was, I didn't have one. Not wanting him to suffer, I hustled back across the pasture to the pickup, grabbed another shell, hurried back to the gravel pit, and put him down. As I came back up out of the gravel pit and I crossed the pasture, I looked up into our yard, where our new home was under construction. I had an audience. The construction crew had been sitting outside in a group taking their afternoon coffee break, watching this entire drama. Right about then, the school bus pulled into the yard, and the kids jumped off excited to see that all the hunting dogs were home. As we let the dogs out of their kennels, Kennedy looked around confused and said, "Hey, where's Cricket?" I guess if I were a better politician, I wouldn't be telling this story right now.
You think? Now, all of these revelations, which, might I remind you, Kristi Noem decided to print and publish herself, have hurt her chances of being Trump's vice presidential candidate or having any future in GOP politics. But if we're to believe what she's written in her book, which is not always a foregone conclusion, that might not bother her all that much.
I still don't want to be in politics. Politics actually sucks.
Well, Governor Noem, you might not be in politics for much longer. Thanks for watching.